Victor Orbán.
Victor Orbán.
Victor Orbán, one of the most respected men, tough person, smart,
Very tough man.
Prime Minister of Hungary.
Who is Victor Orbán? Trump keeps mentioning as a hero of the people, while others are calling him a
nationalist, anti-immigration, xenophobic, white nationalist,
autocrats in there.
One of Vladimir Putin's only European allies.
dictators, strongmen, bad guys,
and many more. Populist leaders around the world hail him as a champion of sovereignty, a guardian of traditional values. Meanwhile, much of the international press brands him an autocrat, a would-be dictator who's hollowed out democratic institutions and muzzled the free press. So how did Viktor Orbán, with 4 consecutive terms as prime minister, secure and maintain this power? Today, we're talking about Hungary and Viktor Orbán, and more importantly, what his playbook means for America under Trump. Hungary, a country nestled in Central Europe, shaped by centuries of shifting borders and foreign domination. Former part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, then under communist rule after World War II, Hungary turned to democracy in 1989. By the early 2000s, Hungary joined NATO and the EU, promising prosperity and closer ties to the West. But disillusionment, political scandals, and economic hardships opened the door for a new kind of leadership. Fast forward to 2024, and Hungary is run by Viktor Orbán's Fidesz party for the 4th consecutive term, a regime that some praise as a safeguard of national identity and others condemn as undermining democracy. To understand if Hungary is a dictatorship or not, we need to define a few things. A democracy, in the simplest sense, is a system where leaders are chosen in free and fair elections, where multiple parties compete, where the media operates independently, and where the rule of law protects citizens' rights. On the other end of the spectrum, an autocracy is where power rests in the hands of a single ruler or ruling party. There are no meaningful elections, opposition voices are silenced, and freedoms are tightly controlled. At the most extreme end, there are totalitarian regimes, Nazi Germany or Stalin's Soviet Union, where the state controls nearly every aspect of life. No opposition or independent thought is tolerated. Within totalitarianism, we also find specific ideologies like fascism or communism, and so on. It's important to note that not all autocracies are totalitarian though. Many are simply dictatorships, systems ruled by a single leader or clique without the all-consuming ideology. They may still hold sham elections, but real competition is non-existent. Some regimes fall, however, into a gray area between these. The so-called hybrid regimes allow limited opposition and controlled elections, so they're less severe than totalitarian states, but far from fully free. This is where Hungary fits in. It's not totalitarian, there is no single unifying ideology that dictates every aspect of life. It's not a classic dictatorship, there are real elections and opposition parties, albeit hamstrung. It's a system that blends elements of democracy with authoritarian tactics. Let's see why this is the case. Here we introduce a framework that helps make sense of Hungary's political system, a concept developed by István Benedek, known as Populist Electoral Autocracy, or PEA. In a PEA, you still have elections, multiple parties, and the outward trappings of democracy. At first glance, it might seem like a functioning democratic system. But beneath this facade, the ruling party skews the playing field, controlling media narratives, redrawing electoral districts, and limiting the resources available to opponents. The result? Elections that may be competitive on paper, yet in practice are heavily weighted in favor of those in power. What drives this distortion? It's the populist rhetoric, an appeal to the people against the elite, justifying manipulating institutions. By claiming to defend the true will of the people, the ruling party paints critics and independent voices as obstacles to national interest. In a populist electoral autocracy, this narrative helps maintain control, eroding genuine pluralism while keeping enough democratic symbols to appear legitimate, both to citizens and to the outside world. Hungary's journey to becoming a populist electoral autocracy didn't happen overnight. In the early 1990s, after the fall of communism, the country seemed on track to build a stable, liberal democracy. But over time, economic hardships, political scandals, and a growing sense of disillusionment paved the way for Victor Orbán's Fidesz party. By 2010, Orbán had won a landslide victory, grabbing 2/3 of the votes, promising a new era. Today, Hungary still has multiple parties on paper, but let's be clear, the ruling party sets the tone. Fidesz-aligned media outlets dominate TV and radio. Critical voices struggle to be heard, and NGOs face intimidation. Electoral rules keep shifting, districts redrawn, laws tweaked to ensure Fidesz maintains a comfortable margin. Even if opposition parties exist, they are boxed into an uneven fight. Populist narratives fuel this system. Orbán's government frames issues like migration as a threat, paints Brussels or global elites as meddling outsiders, and claims to be the true voice defending Hungarian sovereignty. Make no mistake, I'm not advocating for uncontrolled migration or globalism per se, but I'm arguing that Orbán's regime plays a double agent. While on the surface bashing migration, Orbán's regime now supplies work on the countryside with more than 300,000 workers brought in from the Philippines, China, and other countries. And while Orbán boasts about fighting globalism for sovereignty, he lets Western car manufacturers avoid high taxes and get cheap labor in Hungary while suffocating the labor unions. Same goes for getting loans from China and Russia. In return, Orbán pays his debt with providing EU-wide passports for Belarusian and Russian individuals, among whom many suspected to be spies and saboteurs. The same goes for economic debt. China has been building as a contractor the Budapest-Belgrade Railway. The same goes for Paks, which is the nuclear power plant of Hungary that is supposed to be expanded on with the Russians as contractors. To add to this argument, Hungary is also now allowing China to have its own police in Hungary, sort of as a parallel society. Is this what sovereignty looks like? This is why I argue that populism, while it looks like a beast, isn't really a rabid dog. It's a calculated form of government supporting economic and financial interests of a strictly managed clique and political elite. In terms of the elections, media, and independent parties, let's see that. First, consider gerrymandering, redrawing electoral districts to favor one party. In Hungary, after 2010, Fidesz reshaped constituencies so that rural areas where it had strong support gained more weight. The result? Even if the opposition earned a sizable share of the overall votes, Fidesz could convert fewer votes into more seats, making it easier to secure a majority in parliament. But that's not all. The Hungarian electoral system also rewards the ruling party when the opposition is fragmented. Imagine multiple small opposition parties splitting the vote. While they collectively hold a large portion of the electorate, their individual seat counts shrink, leaving Fidesz with a clear path to a disproportionate share of parliament seats. What's even more interesting to think about is how the majority of people even think that the old opposition is only being kept on sort of a payroll by Fidesz to keep up the charade, sort of as a court opposition without the true power to change the system. Compounding this is a media control. Once numerous independent outlets have either been bought up by oligarchs loyal to Orban or closed down. Today, a vast majority of radio, TV, and print media outlets echo the government's narrative, leaving critical voices marginalized, especially on the countryside where national TV is everything and Orban is a mythical hero of the people, fighting the EU, fighting the globalist elite, Soros, everybody who comes along. This near monopoly over messaging doesn't just support Fidesz, it also shapes how voters perceive opponents and issues. Dissenting arguments struggle to reach the public, while pro-government talking points flood the airwaves. Finally, populism ties it all together. By constantly framing political life as a battle between the true Hungarian people and the elitist foreign-backed enemies, the Orban government legitimizes these manipulations. If the opponents are portrayed as traitors or puppets of global powers, then stacking the electoral deck or controlling the press seems like defending the nation's will. This narrative empties public discourse of nuance. Instead of debating policies on merit, everything becomes a war of identities, patriots versus outsiders. It's a climate where gerrymandered districts, biased electoral rules, and the captive media ecosystem aren't just tactics, but patriotic necessities. Hungary's story may seem distant to America. Different history, different language, another continent. But it's not just European commentators who discuss Viktor Orbán's regime. What does it mean when the next US president looks to Hungary for inspiration? A leadership that relies on stacking electoral rules, controlling media narratives, and framing politics as a struggle between the true people and the dangerous elite. Once Trump returns to office, his admiration for Orban can hint at a political playbook. Under this model, securing the next election isn't just about winning on fair terms. It's about reshaping the system to ensure victory. We've seen elements of this before. Attacks on the free press, casting immigrants as threats, branding critics as corrupt elites, and questioning the legitimacy of elections. As we've seen, Hungary's populist electoral autocracy offers a chilling glimpse into what can happen when democratic norms are undermined slowly and when a leader embraces the Orban playbook. But this is just the first episode in a three-part series exploring the global rise of populism and what a second Trump presidency could mean for America. Subscribe and like this video to see the next episodes where we'll dig deeper into the roots of this trend and the specific tactics that could reshape American democracy in the years to come. And as always, I was Matt, your host, and you were watching The White Club.